It was when curiosity about Gatsby was at its highest that the lights in his house failed to go on one Saturday night. Only gradually did I become aware that the automobiles which turned expectantly into his drive stayed for just a minute and then drove sulkily away. My Finn informed me that Gatsby had dismissed every servant in his house a week ago and replaced them with half a dozen others, who never went into the West Egg village to be bribed by the tradesmen, but ordered moderate supplies over the telephone. Next day, Gatsby called me on the phone. Going away? I inquired. No, old sport. I heard you fired all your servants. I wanted somebody who wouldn't gossip. Daisy comes over quite often, in the afternoons. He was calling up at Daisy's request. Would I come to lunch at her house tomorrow? Miss Baker would be there. Half an hour later, Daisy herself telephoned and seemed relieved to find that I was coming. Something was up, and yet I couldn't believe that they would choose this occasion for a scene. The next day was broiling, almost the last, certainly the warmest, of the summer. As my train emerged from the tunnel into sunlight, only the hot whistles of the National Biscuit Company broke the simmering hush at noon. Hot, the conductor said to familiar faces. Some weather. Hot, hot, hot. Is it hot enough for you? Is it hot? Is it? My commutation ticket came back to me with a dark stain from his hand. Through the hall of the Buchanan's house blew a faint wind, carrying the sound of the telephone bell out to Gatsby and me as we waited at the door. The master's body, roared the butler into the mouthpiece. I'm sorry, madame, but we can't furnish it. It's far too hot to touch this noon. What he really said was, yes, yes, I'll see. He set down the receiver and came toward us, glistening slightly, to take our stiff straw hats. Madame expects you in the salon, he cried, needlessly indicating the direction. The room, shadowed well with awnings, was dark and cool. Daisy and Jordan lay upon an enormous couch, like silver idols weighing down their own white dresses against the singing breeze of the fans. We can't move, they said together. Jordan's fingers, powdered white over their tan, rested for a moment in mine. And Mr. Thomas Buchanan, the athlete? I inquired. Simultaneously, I heard his voice, gruff, muffled, husky, at the hall telephone. Gatsby stood in the center of the crimson carpet and gazed around with fascinated eyes. Daisy watched him and laughed, her sweet, exciting laugh. A tiny gust of powder rose from her bosom into the air. The rumor is, whispered Jordan, that that's Tom's girl on the telephone. We were silent. Tom flung open the door, blocked out its space for a moment with his thick body, and hurried into the room. Mr. Gatsby! He put out his broad, flat hand in a well-conceived dislike. I'm glad to see you, sir. Nick? Make us a cool drink, cried Daisy. As he left the room again, she got up and went over to Gatsby and pulled his face down, kissing him on the mouth. You know I love you, she murmured. You forget there's a lady present, said Jordan. Daisy looked around doubtfully. You kiss Nick too. What a low, vulgar girl. I don't care, cried Daisy, and began to clog on the brick fireplace. Then she remembered the heat and sat down guiltily on the couch, just as the freshly laundered nurse leading a little girl came into the room. Blessed, precious, she crooned, holding out her arms. Come to your own mother that loves you. The child, relinquished by the nurse, rushed across the room and rooted shyly into her mother's dress. The blessed precious! Did mother get powder on your old yellowy hair? Stand up now and say, howdy-do. Gatsby and I in turn leaned down and took the small reluctant hand. Afterward, he kept looking at the child with surprise. I don't think he had ever really believed in its existence before. I got dressed before luncheon, said the child, turning eagerly to Daisy. That's because your mother wanted to show you off. Her face bent into the single wrinkle of the small white neck. You dream, you absolute little dream. Yes, admitted the child calmly. Aunt Jordan's got on a white dress, too. And how do you like mother's friends? Daisy turned her around so that she faced Gatsby. Do you think they're pretty? Where's Daddy? She doesn't look like her father, Daisy explained. She looks like me. She's got my hair and shape of the face. Daisy sat back upon the couch. The nurse took a step forward and held out her hand. Come, Pammy. Goodbye, sweetheart. With a reluctant backward glance, the well disciplined child held to her nurse's hand and was pulled out the door, just as Tom came back, preceding 4 gin rickeys that clinked full of ice. Gadsby took up his drink. They certainly look cool, he said, with visible tension. We drank in long, greedy swallows. I read somewhere that the sun's getting hotter every year, said Tom genially. It seems that pretty soon the Earth's going to fall into the sun. Or wait a minute, it's just the opposite. The sun's getting colder every year. We had luncheon in the dining room, darkened too against the heat, and drank down nervous gaiety with the cold ale. What'll we do with ourselves this afternoon? Cried Daisy. And the day after that, and the next 30 years? Don't be morbid, Jordan said. Life starts all over again when it gets crisp in the fall. But it's so hot, insisted Daisy, on the verge of tears, and everything's so confused. Let's all go to town. Who wants to go to town? Demanded Daisy insistently. Gatsby's eyes floated toward her. Oh, she cried. You look so cool. Their eyes met and they stared together at each other, alone in space. With an effort, she glanced down at the table. You always look so cool, she repeated. She had told him that she loved him, and Tom Buchanan saw. He was astounded. His mouth opened a little, and he looked at Gatsby and then back at Daisy as if he had just recognized her as someone he knew a long time ago. All right, broke in Tom quickly. I'm perfectly willing to go to town. Come on, we're all going to town. He got up, his eyes still flashing between Gatsby and his wife. No one moved. Come on! His temper cracked a little. What's the matter anyhow? If we're going to go to town, let's start. His hand, trembling with his effort at self-control, bore to his lips the last of his glass of ale. They went upstairs to get ready while we 3 men stood there shuffling the hot pebbles with our feet. A silver curve of the moon hovered already in the western sky. Gatsby started to speak, changed his mind, but not before Tom wheeled and faced him expectantly. Have you got your stables here? Asked Gatsby with an effort. About a quarter of a mile down the road. Oh. A pause. I don't see the idea of going to town, broke out Tom savagely. Women get these notions in their heads. Shall we take anything to drink? Called Daisy from an upper window. I'll get some whiskey, answered Tom. He went inside. Gatsby turned to me rigidly. I can't say anything in his house, old sport. Well, she's got an indiscreet voice, I remarked. It's full of... I hesitated. Her voice is full of money, he said suddenly. That was it. I never understood before. It was full of money. That was the inexhaustible charms that rose and fell in it, the jingle of it, the cymbal song of it. Tom came out of the house wrapping a quarter bottle in a towel, followed by Daisy and Jordan wearing small tight hats of metallic cloth and carrying light capes over their arms. Shall we all go in my car? Suggested Gatsby. He felt the hot green leather of the seat. I ought to have left it in the shade. Is it standard shift? Demanded Tom. Yes. Well, you take my coupe and let me drive your car to town. The suggestion was distasteful to Gatsby. Well, I don't think there's much gas, he objected. Plenty of gas, said Tom boisterously. He looked at the gauge. And if it runs out, I can stop at a drugstore. You can buy anything at a drugstore nowadays. A pause followed this apparently pointless remark. Daisy looked at Tom, frowning in an indefinable expression at once definitely unfamiliar and vaguely recognizable, as if it had only heard it described in words passed over Gatsby's face. Come on, Daisy, said Tom, pressing her with his hand toward Gatsby's car. I'll take you in this circus wagon. He opened the door, but she moved out from the circle of his arm. You take Nick and Jordan. We'll follow you in the coupe. She walked close to Gatsby, touching his coat with her hand. Jordan and Tom and I got into the front seat of Gatsby's car. Tom pushed the unfamiliar gears tentatively, and we shot off into the oppressive heat, leaving them out of sight behind. "Did you see that?" demanded Tom. "See what?" He looked at me keenly, realizing that Jordan and I must have known all along. "You think I'm pretty dumb, don't you?" he suggested. "Perhaps I am, but I have almost a second sight sometimes that tells me what to do. Maybe you don't believe that, but science—" He paused. "I made a small investigation of this fellow," he continued. "I could have gone deeper if I'd have known." "Do you mean to have been to a medium?" inquired Jordan humorously. "What?" Confused, he stared at us as we laughed. "A medium? About Gadsby? About Gatsby? No, I haven't. I said I've been making a small investigation of his past." "And you found he was an Oxford man," said Jordan, helpfully. "An Oxford man?" He was incredulous. "Like hell he is. He wears a pink suit." "Nevertheless, he's an Oxford man." "Oxford, New Mexico," snorted Tom contemptuously. "Or something like that." "Listen, Tom, if you're such a snob, why did you invite him to lunch?" demanded Jordan crossly. "Well, Daisy invited him. She knew him before we were married. God knows where." We were all irritable now with the fading ale and aware of it as we drove for a while in silence. Then the Dr. T.J. Eckelberg's faded eyes came into sight down the road, and I remembered Gatsby's caution about gasoline. "We've got enough to get us to town," said Tom. "But there's a garage right there," objected Jordan. "I don't want to get stalled in this baking heat." Tom threw on both brakes impatiently, and we slid to an abrupt, dusty stop under Wilson's sign. After a moment, the proprietor emerged from the interior of his establishment and gazed hollow-eyed at the car. "Well, let's have some gas!" cried Tom roughly. "What do you think we stopped for? To admire the view?" "I'm sick," said Tom without moving. "Been sick all day." "What's the matter?" "I'm all run down." "Well, shall I help myself?" Tom demanded. With an effort, Wilson left the shade in support of the doorway and, breathing hard, unscrewed the cap of the tank. In the sunlight, his face was green. "I need money pretty bad, and I was wondering what you were going to do with your old car." "Well, how do you like this one?" inquired Tom. "I bought it last week." "It's a nice yellow one," said Wilson, as he strained at the handle. "Like to buy it?" "Big chance," Wilson smiled faintly. "No, but I could make some money on the other." "What do you want the money for all of a sudden?" "I've been here too long. I want to get away. My wife and I want to go out west." "Your wife does?" exclaimed Tom, startled. "She's been talking about it for 10 years." He rested for a moment against the pump, shading his eyes. "Now she's going to, whether she wants to or not. I'm going to get her away." The coupe flashed by us with a flurry of dust and a flash of a waving hand. "What do I owe you?" demanded Tom harshly. "I just got wised up to something funny the last 2 days," remarked Wilson. "That's why I want to get away. That's why I've been bothering you about the car." "Well, what do I owe you?" $1.20. The relentless beating heat was beginning to confuse me. He had discovered that Myrtle had some sort of life apart from him in another world, and the shock had made him physically sick. I stared at him and then at Tom, who had made a parallel discovery less than an hour before, and it occurred to me that there was no difference between men in intelligence or race so profound as the difference between the sick and the well. Wilson was so sick that he looked guilty, unforgivably guilty. "I'll let you have that car," said Tom. "I'll send it over tomorrow afternoon." In one of the windows over the garage, the curtains had been moved aside a little, and Myrtle Wilson was peering down at the car. So engrossed was she that she had no consciousness of being observed, and one emotion after another crept into her face like objects into a slowly developing picture. Her expression was curiously familiar. It was an expression that I'd seen on women's faces, but on Myrtle's face it seemed purposeless and inexplicable, until I realized that her eyes, wild with jealous terror, were fixed not on Tom but on Jordan Baker, whom she took to be his wife. There is no confusion like the confusion of a simple mind, and as we drove away, Tom was feeling the hot whips of panic. His wife and his mistress, until an hour ago secure, were sipping precipitately from his control. Instinct made him step on the accelerator with the double purpose of overtaking Daisy and leaving Wilson behind. And as we sped along toward Astoria at 50 miles an hour, until among the spidery girders of the elevated, we came into the sight of the easy-going blue coupe.